The German Shepherd ran after cars, begging for help with his eyes, but when a woman stopped and followed him, he couldn't believe what he saw. The morning air carried the scent of rain as Maria Anderson pulled into the gravel driveway of Pinewood Animal Shelter. Dark clouds loomed overhead, threatening to unleash a downpour at any moment. Maria, a veteran volunteer with 10 years of experience, had seen it all. The heartbreaking abandonments, the miraculous recoveries, and everything in between. Yet nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her that day. She grabbed her coffee from the cup holder, took a final sip, and stepped out of her car. The shelter was quiet at this early hour, with only a few staff members preparing for the day ahead. Maria waved to Jake, the young kennel assistant who was hosing down the outdoor runs. "Morning, Maria. Better get inside quick. Looks like it's about to pour," Jake called out, glancing at the ominous sky. Maria hurried to the entrance, her mind already going through her mental checklist for the day. Medications for the 3-legged retriever in Kennel 5, socialization time with the Shy Terrier mix, and paperwork for the recent adoptions, normal tasks on what she expected to be a normal day. The moment she stepped inside, however, she sensed something was different. Sarah, the shelter manager, was pacing the reception area, her face etched with concern. "Thank goodness you're here," Sarah said, rushing toward Maria. "We got a call about 20 minutes ago. Highway Patrol found a German Shepherd on the side of Interstate 40, about 10 miles east. They say he's in bad shape but alive. Animal Control is bringing him in now." Maria's heart sank. Highway cases were often the worst. Dogs hit by cars, abandoned in the middle of nowhere, or lost and wandering for days without food or water. "Any idea what happened?" Maria asked, hanging up her jacket. Sarah shook her head. "The officer said the dog was just sitting there in the rain looking at passing cars as if waiting for someone to stop. When they approached, he didn't run or show aggression, just waited." The sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of the Animal Control van. Maria and Sarah exchanged a look before heading outside, where the rain had finally started to fall in fat, heavy drops. Jeff, the Animal Control officer, stepped out of the van with a grim expression. "It's not good," he said simply, moving to the back of the vehicle. When the doors opened, Maria's breath caught in her throat. Curled in a large crate was one of the most magnificent German Shepherds she had ever seen, or would have been under different circumstances. Now the dog was soaked, caked with mud, and so thin that his ribs were clearly visible beneath his dull coat. But it was his eyes that struck Maria the most. Deep amber pools filled with such profound sadness and pain that it felt almost human. "Hey there, big guy," Maria said softly, approaching the crate. The dog's ears perked slightly at her voice, but the rest of him remained still, save for his labored breathing. "Has he been checked by a vet?" Sarah asked Jeff, who was already filling out the intake paperwork. "Not yet. Thought it best to bring him straight here since you have Dr. Miller coming in today," Jeff replied. Together, they carefully transported the crate into the shelter's medical room. The German Shepherd made no sound, no resistance. He simply watched them with those soulful eyes. Dr. Miller arrived shortly after, shaking rain from his coat as he entered the room. With over 30 years of veterinary experience, very little fazed him anymore, but even he paused when he saw the German Shepherd. "Let's see what we've got here," he said, approaching the crate with calm, measured movements. The examination revealed the extent of the dog's condition. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, various cuts and bruises, and what appeared to be old burn marks on his hindquarters. Most concerning was the heavy chain collar embedded so deeply in his neck that the skin had begun to grow around it. "This wasn't an accident or a case of getting lost," Dr. Miller said grimly. "This dog has been abused, and for quite some time." Maria felt a familiar anger rise within her. the kind that surfaced whenever she encountered the cruelty humans could inflict on innocent animals. But there was something else too, something about this particular dog that touched her deeply. Perhaps it was the dignity he maintained despite everything he had endured. "What's remarkable," Dr. Miller continued, "is that there's no aggression. After what he's been through, he should be fearful or defensive. But look at him. He's just waiting." And indeed, the German Shepherd watched them with an eerie calmness, his eyes following their movements as if assessing their intentions. The treatment began immediately. They sedated him to remove the embedded collar, cleaned his wounds, started him on fluids and antibiotics, and gave him a thorough but gentle bath. Through it all, Maria stayed by his side, speaking softly to him, even when he was under sedation. "You're safe now," she whispered, gently stroking his damp fur. "No one's going to hurt you again." As the day progressed, the shelter staff debated what to name him. "He needs something strong," Jake suggested, "something that honors what he's survived." In the end, they settled on Atlas, the titan who bore the weight of the world on his shoulders. It seemed fitting for a dog who had carried such a burden of suffering, yet remained unbroken. By evening, Atlas was resting in a quiet kennel, separate from the other dogs to minimize stress. Maria had stayed well past her volunteer hours, unable to tear herself away. There was something about this dog, something she couldn't quite define, that called to her. "You should go home, get some rest," Sarah told her. "He'll be here tomorrow." Maria nodded reluctantly. "I know. It's just... Did you see his eyes? It's like he's trying to tell us something." Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "You've always had a soft spot for the tough cases, but this one, yeah, there's something special about him." Before leaving, Maria visited Atlas one last time. He was awake, his head resting on his paws. When he saw her, his tail thumped once against the blanket, a small gesture that brought tears to Maria's eyes. "I'll be back first thing tomorrow, boy," she promised. "You just rest and get stronger." As she drove home through the rain-slicked streets, Maria couldn't shake the image of Atlas from her mind. In 15 years of rescue work, she had never connected with an animal so quickly or so deeply. It was as if some invisible thread had tied itself between her heart and his from the moment their eyes met. She didn't know it yet, but Atlas was about to change not only her life, but the lives of an entire community. The next morning, Maria arrived at the shelter before dawn. She found Atlas awake, alert, and, most surprisingly, standing. Though visibly weak, he wagged his tail when he saw her, a gesture that seemed to take considerable effort. "Well, look at you," Maria said, entering the kennel slowly and sitting on the floor. Atlas approached cautiously, then lowered himself beside her with a soft groan. When she reached out to touch him, he leaned into her hand. Dr. Miller arrived for his follow-up and was impressed with Atlas's progress. "His blood work still shows significant issues, and he's at least 20 pounds underweight, but his will to recover is strong," he explained. "The real question is what's happening inside that head of his. The psychological trauma from that level of abuse can be harder to heal than physical wounds." Yet over the next few days, Atlas defied expectations. Though still weak and underweight, he showed no signs of fear or aggression. He accepted care from all the shelter staff, though he seemed to have a special connection with Maria. Each morning when she arrived, his entire demeanor would change. His eyes would brighten, his tail would wag, and he would make a soft, whining sound that almost resembled a greeting. What puzzled everyone, however, was his behavior in the outdoor exercise area. Rather than exploring or playing like most dogs, Atlas would sit at the fence line, staring intently in the direction of the highway where he'd been found. "It's like he's waiting for someone," Jake observed on the fourth day as they watched Atlas from across the yard. "Or looking for someone," Maria replied softly. "I think he might have been abandoned out there." Sarah shook her head. "With those old injuries? This wasn't a recent abandonment. He's been suffering for months, maybe longer." The mystery of Atlas deepened when Dr. Miller discovered a faded tattoo inside his ear during a follow-up examination. It wasn't a typical identification number or breeding mark. "It looks military," Dr. Miller said, showing Maria the series of letters and numbers. "I've seen similar markings on working dogs before." A quick call to a contact at the nearest military base confirmed Dr. Miller's suspicion. The tattoo identified Atlas as a former military working dog, specifically one trained for explosive detection. According to the records, he had been reported as missing in action during a training exercise 2 years prior. "They searched for weeks," the military veterinarian explained over the phone. "It was assumed he'd been killed by wildlife or died from exposure. No one ever imagined he'd been stolen." The pieces began to fall into place. Someone had taken Atlas, perhaps seeing value in a highly trained military dog, then subjected him to the abuse evident in his scarred body. But how did he end up on the highway? Sarah wondered when they shared the news. Maria had a theory. "I think he escaped, and I think he was trying to find his way back to where he belonged." The military expressed interest in reclaiming Atlas, but after hearing about his condition and the suspected abuse, they agreed to release him from service officially. "He's served his country," the commander said. "Now he deserves a chance at a peaceful retirement." News of Atlas's story spread quickly through the shelter's social media accounts. People were touched by the image of the dignified German Shepherd, who had endured so much yet maintained his gentle spirit. Donations poured in for his care, along with dozens of adoption offers. Maria found herself feeling strangely protective. She reviewed each application with extra scrutiny, finding reasons why even the best-looking homes might not be right for Atlas. Deep down, she knew what was happening. She was falling in love with him. On the 10th day after his rescue, as Maria sat with Atlas during her lunch break, she finally admitted the truth to herself. She couldn't bear the thought of him going to another home. In her small apartment with its no pets policy, adopting him would mean significant changes. Yet as Atlas rested his head on her lap, those amber eyes gazing up at her with complete trust, she knew there was no other choice. That evening, Maria approached Sarah with her decision. "I should have seen this coming," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "From the moment he arrived, there was something between you two." "But Maria, are you sure? Your apartment—" "I've already spoken to my landlord," Maria interrupted. "And I've been approved for that little house on Maple Street, the one with the fenced yard. We can move in next month." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "You're changing your entire living situation for him?" Maria nodded without hesitation. "He's changed my life already. It seems only fair." The day Maria brought Atlas home was filled with nervous excitement. The little house on Maple Street wasn't fully furnished yet. Boxes still lined the walls, and the living room contained only a couch and coffee table, but Maria had made sure Atlas's corner was perfect. A plush orthopedic bed, toys carefully selected for a dog recovering from trauma, food and water bowls at the right height to reduce strain on his neck. "Welcome home, buddy," she said, opening the front door and letting him step inside at his own pace. Atlas entered cautiously, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. He sniffed the air, then methodically began exploring the space, room by room. Maria followed at a distance, giving him freedom while ensuring he felt secure. When he completed his inspection, he returned to her side and leaned gently against her leg, his way of showing affection without being too demonstrative. "What do you think? Will it do?" she asked, scratching behind his ears. Atlas looked up at her, then walked to his bed, circled 3 times and settled in with a contented sigh that seemed to say, This will do just fine." The first few weeks were a period of adjustment for both of them. Maria had always loved dogs, but had never owned one as an adult. Her job at the local community college and volunteer work at the shelter had always been her excuse. Not enough time, not enough space. Now, her life revolved around Atlas's feeding schedule, medication times, short therapeutic walks, and training sessions designed to help him regain confidence. Dr. Miller had warned her that trauma could manifest in unexpected ways. "Right now, he's still in survival mode," he'd explained. "As he feels safer, you might start seeing behavioral changes, maybe fear reactions, maybe aggression. Be patient and consistent." But Atlas continued to defy expectations. The only unusual behaviors he displayed were his tendency to patrol the house perimeter before settling down for the night, and his habit of positioning himself between Maria and the door whenever someone knocked. "He's still a working dog at heart," Dr. Miller observed during a checkup visit. "He's appointed himself as your protector." As Atlas's physical health improved, Maria began taking him for longer walks around the neighborhood. His military training was evident in the way he walked perfectly at her side, alert but calm, responding to subtle cues in her body language. Neighbors soon grew accustomed to the sight of the woman and her regal German shepherd, though many were initially intimidated by Atlas's serious demeanor. "Does he ever play?" asked Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly neighbor who often greeted them on their morning route. The question made Maria realize that in the 6 weeks since she'd adopted him, she had never seen Atlas truly play. He would politely accept toys, even carry them around, but the joyful abandon that most dogs showed with a ball or squeaky toy seemed foreign to him. That evening, Maria sat on the floor beside Atlas's bed. "What did they do to you that made you forget how to play?" she whispered, stroking his now glossy coat. Atlas responded by placing his paw on her hand, a gesture that never failed to move her. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Maria had brought home a bright yellow tennis ball, hoping to entice Atlas into a game of fetch in the backyard. As usual, he watched with polite interest, but made no move to engage. Sighing, Maria tossed the ball aside and turned to go back inside. The sound made her freeze in her tracks, a soft whine followed by an unmistakable woof. She turned to find Atlas staring at the ball, then looking at her expectantly. "Do you want the ball, buddy?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. Atlas took a tentative step toward the ball, then looked back at her as if asking permission. "Go ahead," she encouraged. "It's yours." Another step, then another, until he reached the ball. He sniffed it thoroughly, nudged it with his nose, and then, to Maria's astonishment, picked it up and trotted back to her, dropping it at her feet. Tears sprang to Maria's eyes as she threw the ball again. This time, Atlas bounded after it with unexpected energy, his powerful body moving with grace and purpose. When he returned with the ball, his eyes held a new light, a spark of joy that had been missing until now. They played until the sun began to set, Atlas growing more enthusiastic with each throw. By the time they went inside, both were pleasantly exhausted, and for the first time since she'd known him, Atlas's mouth hung open in what could only be described as a doggy smile. That night, instead of sleeping on his bed, Atlas jumped onto Maria's bed and curled up at her feet. She didn't have the heart to make him move. "I guess we're making new rules tonight," she murmured, reaching down to pat him. He responded with a contented groan before drifting off to sleep. The following weeks brought more progress. Atlas began greeting Maria at the door with playful bounds when she returned from work. He learned to play tug-of-war, always letting her win, discovered the joy of chasing squirrels in the yard, never actually catching them, and even made friends with the neighbor's golden retriever puppy, showing surprising patience with the energetic youngster. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing the playful, affectionate dog that had been locked away beneath layers of trauma and military discipline. Yet he never lost the dignified bearing that made him so special, or his protective instincts toward Maria. 3 months after bringing Atlas home, Maria decided he was ready for a bigger outing. The local park had a popular dog area where pets could run off leash, and she thought the socialization would be good for him. She'd avoided such busy places until now, concerned about how he might react to crowds of unfamiliar dogs and people. The park was bustling that Saturday morning. Dogs of all sizes romped across the grassy enclosure while their owners chatted on benches around the perimeter. Maria felt Atlas tense slightly beside her as they approached the gate, but he showed no signs of fear or aggression. "Ready to make some friends?" she asked, unclipping his leash once they were inside the fence. Atlas stayed close to her at first, watching the other dogs with cautious interest. A friendly Labrador approached, initiating play with a play bow. After a moment's hesitation, Atlas responded in kind, and soon the two were engaged in a spirited game of chase. Maria found a spot on a bench, keeping an eye on Atlas while he interacted with various dogs. She couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at how far he'd come. "That's one impressive dog you've got there," said a deep voice beside her. Maria turned to find a tall man in his 40s, dressed in cargo pants and a plain black t-shirt, watching Atlas with a professional eye. "Thank you," she replied. "He's been through a lot, but he's doing really well now." The man nodded. "German Shepherd, former military working dog, I'm guessing." Maria looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "The way he moves, the discipline even when he's playing," the man explained. "I worked with military dogs for 15 years. May I?" He gestured toward the empty space on the bench. "Of course," Maria said, intrigued. "I'm Maria, by the way." "David," he responded, offering his hand. "I run a training program for service dogs now, mainly for veterans with PTSD." They watched as Atlas expertly navigated the social dynamics of the dog park, avoiding a confrontation between two aggressive terriers and gently encouraging a shy spaniel to join in the play. "He's a natural," David commented. "Has he had any specialized training since you adopted him?" Maria shook her head. "Just basic obedience and some confidence-building exercises." "Why?" David turned to face her fully. "I don't usually do this, but I'd like to talk to you about a possibility. Our program is always looking for dogs with the right temperament to train as therapy animals. Dogs that can work with traumatized veterans, especially those with combat-related PTSD. You want Atlas?" Maria felt a sudden protectiveness. David smiled reassuringly. "Not to take him from you. We work with owner-handler teams. The bond you've already established with him would be an asset, not an obstacle." As if sensing he was being discussed, Atlas trotted over, checking in with Maria before returning to his new friends. "He was abused," Maria said quietly, "before I got him. We think after he went missing from his military unit, someone took him and—" She couldn't finish the sentence. David's expression grew serious. "That actually makes him even more valuable for our program. A dog that has experienced trauma and recovered can have a special connection with humans who are going through the same process." He handed her a business card. "Think about it. No pressure. We're starting a new training cohort next month. Even if you decide it's not for you, I'd be happy to give you some advanced training tips for him. He's too talented to not develop those skills further." Maria turned the card over in her hand, considering. Atlas had already transformed from the broken dog they'd found by the highway into a loving, confident companion. What might he become if given the chance to help others heal as he had? As they left the park later that afternoon, Atlas walking proudly beside her, Maria felt a sense of purpose taking shape. This remarkable dog had been given a second chance at life, and in the process, had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing, a calling that extended beyond her comfortable routine. She looked down at the business card again, then at Atlas. "What do you think, buddy? Ready for a new adventure?" Atlas looked up at her, amber eyes bright with trust and intelligence, and wagged his tail as if to say, "Lead the way." The training center was located on the outskirts of town, a sprawling facility set on 20 acres of mixed woodland and open fields. As Maria drove through the gates with Atlas in the back seat, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. After several conversations with David and much consideration, she had decided to enroll in the program, committing to the intensive 6-month training that would prepare both her and Atlas for therapy work with veterans. "What do you think, boy?" she asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Atlas sat alert, his ears perked forward as he surveyed the new environment. Since making the decision 3 weeks ago, Maria had wondered if she was doing the right thing. Atlas had already experienced so much trauma. Was it fair to ask him to help others with theirs? But each time she watched him interact with new people, the gentle way he approached children, his patience with the elderly, she became more convinced that this was his calling. The main building was a renovated barn, its red exterior freshly painted and welcoming. Several people with dogs of various breeds were gathered outside, apparently waiting for the orientation to begin. Maria parked and took a deep breath before opening the back door for Atlas. "Remember what David said. This is just an introduction today. No pressure, no expectations," she reminded herself as much as Atlas. She clipped on his leash, though she hardly needed it anymore. He never strayed from her side in unfamiliar surroundings. David spotted them immediately and walked over, his face breaking into a warm smile. "You made it. I'm glad." He bent slightly to greet Atlas, who remembered him from their meeting at the dog park, and responded with a dignified tail wag. "Still looking fantastic, my friend. Ready to meet the rest of the class?" Maria nodded, surveying the group. There were about a dozen handler dog teams, a diverse mix of people and breeds that ranged from a massive Great Dane to a surprisingly small Corgi. Some handlers appeared confident, while others looked as nervous as Maria felt. "Is everyone here a dog owner?" she asked as they walked toward the group. David nodded. "For this program, yes. We have other tracks where we train dogs and then pair them with veterans, but this cohort is specifically for established teams." He paused, then added, "Most of the handlers are either veterans themselves or have family members who served. The personal connection makes a difference." Maria hadn't considered this aspect. "I'm not a veteran," she said, feeling suddenly out of place. "No one in my immediate family has served either." David stopped and turned to her. "But you saved a military dog, nursed him back to health, and gave him a purpose again. Trust me, that counts for something in this community." The orientation began with introductions all around. Maria learned that the Great Dane belonged to a former Marine named Jason, who had lost his leg in Afghanistan. The Corgi was partnered with Elena, whose son was currently deployed overseas and suffered from severe PTSD from his previous tour. Each story was unique, but all shared a common thread of hope: the belief that these dogs could make a difference in the lives of those who had sacrificed for their country. When it was Maria's turn, she hesitated before sharing Atlas's history. "I don't know everything he went through," she concluded, "but I know he survived it with his spirit intact. If he can help even one person feel the same hope for recovery that he's given me, it will be worth it." Several of the veterans nodded in understanding, and Maria felt a connection forming, not just between Atlas and the group, but between herself and these people whose experiences were so different from her own. The training program was more demanding than Maria had anticipated. 3 days a week they attended sessions at the center, learning everything from advanced obedience commands to specific techniques for calming anxiety attacks and providing deep pressure therapy. The other 4 days, they practiced at home, gradually increasing the complexity of the tasks Atlas needed to master. Atlas thrived under the structured environment. His military background made him exceptionally receptive to the training protocols, and he seemed to intuitively understand the purpose behind each new skill. By the end of the first month, he could already respond to subtle signs of distress in a person, providing gentle physical contact without being intrusive. "He's a natural," David commented after watching Atlas perform a complex sequence of behaviors in response to a simulated panic attack. "Some dogs we have to train for months to achieve what he's picked up in weeks." But it wasn't all smooth sailing. During the second month of training, they encountered an unexpected challenge. The program included exposure to various environmental stressors that veterans might experience: loud noises, crowded spaces, and unpredictable movements. When they introduced the sound of gunfire, carefully controlled recordings played at gradually increasing volumes, Atlas's demeanor changed dramatically. He didn't bark or growl. Instead, he went completely still, his body rigid and his eyes fixed on some distant point. Maria recognized the behavior immediately. It was the same frozen state he'd exhibited when she first met him at the shelter. "Atlas," she called softly, but he showed no sign of hearing her. It was as if he had retreated deep inside himself, to some place she couldn't reach. David approached slowly, his expression concerned but not alarmed. "This is a trigger response," he explained quietly. "Given his background, it makes sense. The sound is taking him back to a traumatic experience." "What do we do?" Maria asked, fighting back tears. It was heartbreaking to see Atlas regress after all his progress. "We work through it, patiently and carefully," David replied. "This isn't a setback, Maria. It's an opportunity for Atlas to heal more completely and for you to learn how to help him through it. That knowledge will be invaluable when you're working with veterans who experience similar reactions." Over the next several weeks, they developed a protocol specifically for Atlas. Using techniques similar to those employed with human PTSD patients, they gradually desensitized him to the triggering sounds while reinforcing positive associations. Progress was slow but steady. Maria learned to recognize the subtle signs that preceded Atlas's freeze response and intervene before he became fully triggered. What surprised her most during this process was the support she received from the other handlers, particularly the veterans. Jason, the former Marine with the Great Dane, shared techniques that had helped with his own episodes. Elena brought homemade dog treats specifically for Atlas, having researched calming foods for canines experiencing stress. "We're all in this together," Jason told her one afternoon as they watched their dogs play during a break. "What you're going through with Atlas, learning to help him past his trauma, it's not that different from what my wife went through with me when I first came home." By the end of the third month, Atlas could remain calm during even the loudest simulated gunfire. More importantly, Maria had developed a deeper understanding of the invisible wounds that both humans and animals could carry. "You've both come so far," David remarked during their assessment, "but the real test is still ahead: actual work with veterans in crisis situations." The fourth month of training introduced a new element: practice sessions with real veterans who weren't part of the program but had volunteered to help train the dogs. These men and women had various forms of PTSD and other combat-related issues, and the dogs needed to learn how to respond appropriately to genuine distress signals rather than simulated ones. Maria felt nervous the first time Atlas was paired with a veteran named Michael, a middle-aged man with severe anxiety and hypervigilance issues stemming from his time in Iraq. The session took place in a controlled environment with David observing, but there was still an element of unpredictability that couldn't be scripted. Michael sat silently on a bench in the training room, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Maria and Atlas entered quietly, following the protocols they'd practiced. She gave Atlas the signal to assess, and he approached Michael slowly, maintaining a non-threatening posture. What happened next moved Maria to tears. Without any further commands, Atlas gently pressed his body against Michael's leg, then looked up at him with those soulful amber eyes. After a moment's hesitation, Michael unclenched one hand and placed it on Atlas's head. The effect was almost immediate. His breathing slowed, his shoulders relaxed, and for a brief moment, the hypervigilance seemed to fade. "Good boy," Michael whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Good boy, good." By the end of the session, Michael was able to walk Atlas around the room, focusing on the dog rather than scanning for threats. When it was time to leave, he knelt down to Atlas's level and looked into his eyes. "You understand, don't you?" he said softly. "You've been there too." As they drove home that evening, Maria found herself reflecting on the day's events. Atlas had connected with Michael in a way that transcended training, in a way she herself couldn't have facilitated alone. It was as if the German Shepherd recognized a kindred spirit, someone else who carried invisible scars but was fighting to heal. "You're going to change lives," she told Atlas, who was dozing in the back seat, exhausted from the emotional work of the day. "You already have." The graduation ceremony was small but meaningful, held in the training center's main hall with family members and program supporters in attendance. Each handler dog team received a special certification, and the dogs were presented with official therapy vests emblazoned with the program's logo, a canine silhouette alongside a human one, connected by an unbroken circle. As David placed the vest on Atlas, Maria felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She thought of that rainy day at the shelter, of the broken, desperate animal they had rescued from the side of the highway. Now that same dog stood tall and confident, his amber eyes bright with purpose as he accepted his new role. "Atlas and Maria," David announced to the audience, "have demonstrated exceptional aptitude in all areas of training. Their bond and mutual trust create the foundation for truly transformative therapy work. I'm proud to certify them for service." The applause that followed seemed to embarrass Atlas slightly. He pressed closer to Maria's leg and looked up at her as if to say, "Why all the fuss?" Jason and his Great Dane, Titan, were the first to congratulate them after the ceremony. Over the months of training, Jason had become something of a mentor to Maria, helping her understand the veteran perspective in ways no training manual could capture. "So, you ready for the real work?" he asked, his prosthetic leg visible beneath his shorts. The summer heat had arrived in full force, and Jason no longer felt the need to hide his injury around the group. "I think so," Maria replied, though her stomach fluttered with nervous energy. "We're starting at the VA hospital next week, just 2 sessions to begin with." Jason nodded. "That's how they broke us in too. Word of advice? Trust your dog. There'll be moments when you're not sure what to do or say, especially at first. Atlas will know. These animals..." He paused, reaching down to pat Titan's massive head. "They understand pain in ways we can't explain. They speak a language we've forgotten." On the drive home, Maria rolled down the windows despite the heat, enjoying the way Atlas thrust his nose into the rushing air, ears flapping slightly. These small moments of doggy joy never failed to delight her, reminders that despite his serious work and dignified bearing, he was still at heart a dog who found pleasure in simple things. "We did it, buddy," she said, reaching back to scratch his shoulder. But Jason's right. The real work is just beginning. The Veterans Affairs Hospital was a sprawling complex of connected buildings, with a maze-like interior that reminded Maria of a small city. Their first assignment was in the long-term rehabilitation wing, where veterans recovering from physical injuries also received treatment for psychological trauma. Maria felt the weight of responsibility as she and Atlas walked through the sliding glass doors that first Monday morning. They checked in at the volunteer desk, where a kind-faced older woman named Ruth provided visitor badges and directions. "You're working with Dr. Patel today," Ruth explained, eyeing Atlas appreciatively. "Beautiful dog. German Shepherd?" "Yes," Maria replied, already used to the question. "He's a former military working dog himself." Ruth's eyes widened with interest. "Is that so? Well, that should make for some interesting connections with our patients." Dr. Patel was a petite woman with a brisk manner but warm eyes. She met them in a small consultation room to explain the day's schedule. "We have 4 patients who've specifically requested animal therapy," she explained. 2 with physical injuries and PTSD, 1 with severe depression following combat trauma, and 1 with traumatic brain injury that's resulted in speech difficulties. 45 minutes each, with 15-minute breaks between sessions. How does that sound? Maria nodded, grateful for the clear structure. "That sounds perfect. Should we know anything specific about each patient before meeting them?" Dr. Patel considered the question. "I'll give you a brief overview before each session, but I find it's often better if you and Atlas can form your own impressions without too many preconceptions. Some of our staff tend to see the diagnosis rather than the person." Their first patient was a young woman named Tanya, who had lost both legs below the knee in an IED explosion. She was seated in a wheelchair when they entered her room, her face turned toward the window with an expression of profound detachment. "Tanya," Dr. Patel said gently, "this is Maria and Atlas. They're here for your therapy session today." Tanya turned slowly, her gaze first landing on Maria with polite disinterest, then shifting to Atlas. Something flickered in her eyes, the faintest spark of engagement. "Can he come closer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maria nodded and gave Atlas the signal to approach. He moved forward with careful steps, his training evident in every movement. When he reached Tanya's wheelchair, he sat perfectly positioned for her to reach him without straining. Tanya hesitated, then extended a trembling hand to touch his head. "I had a German Shepherd when I was a kid," she said, her fingers gently exploring the contours of Atlas's ears. "Bella. She slept on my bed every night, even though my mom said she wasn't allowed." It was the longest speech Dr. Patel had heard from Tanya in weeks. She caught Maria's eye and nodded encouragingly. "Atlas likes to sleep on my bed too," Maria offered. "He starts in his own bed every night, but somehow by morning he's always migrated to mine." A ghost of a smile touched Tanya's lips. "They're sneaky that way." For the remainder of the session, Tanya gradually became more animated, sharing stories about Bella while stroking Atlas's coat. She asked questions about his training and background, showing particular interest when Maria explained his military history. "So he knows," Tanya said softly, looking into Atlas's amber eyes. "He knows what it's like out there." By the end of the 45 minutes, Tanya had moved from her wheelchair to sit on the floor with Atlas, her prosthetic legs stretched out before her. When it was time for them to leave, she looked directly at Maria for the first time. "Will you come back?" "Yes," Maria promised. "We'll be here next week, same time." Dr. Patel walked them to their next session, her expression thoughtful. "That was remarkable," she said quietly. "Tanya hasn't engaged that deeply with any therapy we've offered. Something about Atlas clearly resonates with her." The remaining sessions of the day were equally impactful, though each in different ways. A middle-aged veteran with severe depression found comfort simply sitting with Atlas's head in his lap, the physical contact seeming to anchor him in the present moment. The patient with the traumatic brain injury practiced his speech by giving Atlas commands, the dog's patient responsiveness building his confidence with each successful interaction. Their final patient was an older man named Frank, a Vietnam veteran whose PTSD had been triggered by a recent health scare, bringing back nightmares and flashbacks he thought he'd conquered decades ago. Frank was initially skeptical about the therapy. "With all due respect, ma'am," he told Maria, "I've been dealing with this longer than you've been alive. Not sure how a dog is supposed to help now." Maria didn't take offense. "That's fair. Maybe he won't help. But Atlas was a military dog. He's seen combat, been through trauma himself. Maybe there's something to be said for being understood by another warrior." Frank's expression changed slightly. He studied Atlas with new interest, noting the dignified bearing and alert eyes. "You were in the service, boy?" Atlas, as if understanding the question, moved closer to Frank and sat at attention. "I'll be damned," Frank murmured. He extended a gnarled hand, which Atlas gently nuzzled. "Where did you serve, soldier?" For the remainder of the session, Frank spoke directly to Atlas, sharing memories he'd kept locked away for years. Maria remained quiet, understanding that her role was simply to facilitate this unique connection between two veterans, one human, one canine. When it was time to leave, Frank rested his hand on Atlas's head in a gesture that seemed almost like a blessing. "Good job, soldier," he said gruffly. "You're still serving, just in a different way now." As they walked back to the car at the end of that first day, Maria felt a complex mixture of emotions. Exhaustion, yes, but also deep fulfillment and a newfound respect for Atlas's innate abilities. He had connected with each patient in precisely the way they needed, offering different aspects of himself to each unique situation. "You're amazing," she told him as they drove home in the golden light of late afternoon. "I think I just need to get out of your way and let you work your magic." Atlas, tired but content in the back seat, thumped his tail against the cushion in what Maria had come to recognize as his way of saying, "We did good work today." And they had. It was just the beginning, but already Maria could see that the desperate German shepherd from the highway had found his true calling, bringing hope and healing to those who, like him, carried invisible wounds. As summer gave way to fall, Atlas and Maria established a rhythm with their therapy work. Their schedule expanded to 3 days a week, 2 at the VA hospital and 1 at a residential treatment facility for veterans with severe PTSD. Word of the remarkable German Shepherd spread through the veteran community, and their waiting list grew longer each week. Dr. Patel had become one of their strongest advocates, documenting the measurable improvements in patients who worked with Atlas regularly. Tanya, their first patient, had made such significant progress with her physical therapy that she was now using prosthetics full-time and had begun volunteering at the hospital's information desk. She credited her breakthrough to the motivation she felt to walk Atlas herself. "There's something about him," she told Maria during one of their now regular coffee meetups. "He doesn't pity me. He just expects me to keep going. And somehow, that makes me want to." Frank, the Vietnam veteran, had started a support group for older veterans using stories of his sessions with Atlas to illustrate the power of confronting long-buried trauma. "If a dog can face his demons," he liked to say, "then so can we." Maria found herself growing not just as a handler but as a person. The veterans' stories, their courage, resilience, and occasional humor in the face of unimaginable challenges shifted her perspective on her own life. Problems that once seemed significant now appeared manageable. And through it all, Atlas remained her anchor, his steady presence a reminder of what truly mattered. But not every case was a success story. Some veterans weren't ready for the emotional vulnerability that working with Atlas seemed to encourage. Others connected well with him, but struggled to maintain their progress once the sessions ended. Maria learned to celebrate the small victories and accept that healing rarely followed a straight path. One crisp October morning, Dr. Patel approached them with an unusual request. "We have a new patient I'd like you to work with," she explained, "but it's a bit of a challenging case." They were sitting in the small office Dr. Patel used for consultations, Atlas resting at Maria's feet after an intensive morning session with a group of amputees. "Challenging how?" Maria asked, automatically reaching down to stroke Atlas's back. After 6 months of therapy work, they'd encountered a wide range of situations, from panic attacks to dissociative episodes. She felt confident in their ability to handle most challenges. Dr. Patel hesitated, which was unusual for the typically direct physician. His name is Captain Robert Garner, 34 years old, Special Forces, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. He was injured in an ambush 4 months ago, lost his spotter and 2 other team members. Physically, he's recovered well, but psychologically, she trailed off, shaking her head. "PTSD?" Maria prompted. "Among other things. Survivor's guilt, depression, anger management issues. He's been resistant to traditional therapy. Actually, resistant is putting it mildly. He's refused to participate in any of our programs." Maria frowned. "Then why do you think he'd work with us?" Dr. Patel sighed. "I don't know that he will, but his wife is desperate for him to try something, anything. And there's one detail that might be significant. He was a dog handler in the military. His dog, a Belgian Malinois named Rex, was killed in the same ambush that injured him." Maria felt a pang of sadness, understanding now why Dr. Patel had hesitated. This wasn't just a challenging case, it was potentially a painful one for all involved. "You're worried that seeing Atlas might trigger him, or it might be exactly what he needs." Dr. Patel looked down at Atlas, who had lifted his head at the shift in the conversation's tone. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't think it was worth trying. His wife mentioned that before the ambush, he'd talked about training service dogs after retirement. There was a connection there." Maria considered for a moment, then looked at Atlas. "What do you think, buddy? Up for a challenge?" Atlas's ears perked up, his expression attentive. "All right," Maria said, turning back to Dr. Patel. "When do we meet him?" Captain Garner's room was at the end of the hallway in the rehabilitation wing. Unlike most patient rooms, his door was closed, and a "Do Not Disturb" sign hung from the handle. Dr. Patel knocked anyway, receiving a muffled and distinctly unwelcoming response from within. "Captain Garner, it's Dr. Patel. I have visitors for you today." "Not interested," came the curt reply. Dr. Patel gave Maria an apologetic look before speaking again. "One of them is a former military working dog, German Shepherd, explosives detection specialist." There was a long pause. Then, just as Maria thought they would have to leave, the door opened. Captain Robert Garner was tall and broadly built, with the physical presence that came from years of military training. But his face told a different story. Deep shadows under bloodshot eyes, several days' worth of stubble, and a tightness around his mouth that spoke of constant pain. His right arm was scarred from what looked like burn injuries, and he held himself stiffly, suggesting other, less visible wounds. His gaze swept over Dr. Patel and Maria without interest before landing on Atlas. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or remembered loss. "Belgian Malinois are better in the field," he said flatly. "Shepherds are too cautious." It wasn't exactly an invitation, but Dr. Patel took it as one. "May we come in, Captain?" He stepped back from the doorway without answering, which they interpreted as permission. The room was Spartanly neat, with few personal touches except for a framed photograph on the bedside table, Garner in combat gear with a Belgian Malinois at his side, both looking alert and formidable in the desert sun. "This is Maria Anderson," Dr. Patel began the introductions, "and her partner Atlas. They work with our therapy program." "I don't need therapy," Garner stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "especially not the fuzzy, four-legged kind." Maria recognized the defense mechanism, Deflection through dismissiveness. She'd seen it before in veterans who were afraid to hope for improvement. "That's fine," she replied calmly. "Atlas and I are just taking a break between sessions. Dr. Patel mentioned you were a dog handler, so we thought we'd say hello, one professional to another." Her approach seemed to catch Garner off guard. He'd clearly expected a pitch about the benefits of therapy, not a casual professional acknowledgement. His eyes narrowed slightly as he reassessed her. Where did he serve? The question was directed at Maria, but his gaze was fixed on Atlas, who had remained in a perfect sit position by her side, maintaining a respectful distance from Garner. "He was with an EOD unit," Maria answered, using the military abbreviation for explosive ordnance disposal. "He went missing during a training exercise and was presumed dead. We don't know everything that happened to him after that, but when we found him, he had been abused and abandoned." Garner's jaw tightened. Who would abuse a military dog? The genuine outrage in his voice was the first real emotion he'd displayed. Maria sensed an opening. "Someone who didn't understand his value," she said quietly, "or his heart." Garner moved closer to Atlas, his movements careful, professional. Atlas remained still, watching the captain with intelligent eyes. When Garner extended his hand, palm down, Atlas sniffed it thoroughly before giving it a gentle nudge with his nose, accepting the introduction. "May I?" Garner asked, glancing at Maria for the first time. She nodded. "He's friendly, but respectful of space. He'll tell you what he's comfortable with." Captain Garner knelt slowly, bringing himself to eye level with Atlas. The movement seemed to cause him pain, but he ignored it, focused entirely on the dog before him. He didn't try to pet Atlas immediately, instead just studying him, professional to professional. "You've seen some things, haven't you, soldier?" he murmured. Atlas held his gaze steadily, then did something Maria hadn't seen him do before with a new patient. He leaned forward and rested his head briefly against Garner's chest, directly over his heart, before sitting back in position. The simple gesture seemed to crack something in the captain's carefully maintained facade. He reached out with his scarred hand and gently touched Atlas's head, just once, before standing up again. "He's well trained," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Better than most of the handlers I've worked with." Maria recognized the compliment for what it was. Not just approval of Atlas, but a tiny opening of a door that had been firmly shut until now. "Thank you," she replied, "though I can't take much credit. He came to me with most of his skills intact. I just helped him remember who he was." Captain Garner's eyes flicked back to the photograph of himself and Rex. "That's so," he said softly, almost to himself. Dr. Patel, who had remained quietly observant, chose this moment to speak. "We should let you rest, Captain, but perhaps Maria and Atlas could stop by again tomorrow, just for a few minutes." Garner didn't answer immediately. He looked at Atlas once more, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. "Yeah," he finally said, turning away to look out the window. "They can come back." It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was something. As they left the room, Maria exchanged a hopeful glance with Dr. Patel. Atlas, walking perfectly at heel beside her, seemed to carry himself with a subtle pride, as if aware that he had accomplished something important. "That's the most he's engaged with anyone since he arrived," Dr. Patel whispered once they were in the hallway. "You were right to just be straightforward with him." "I didn't do anything," Maria replied honestly. "It was all Atlas. He knew exactly what Captain Garner needed." And that, Maria was beginning to understand, was Atlas's true gift. Beyond all his training and skills, he possessed an uncanny ability to recognize pain in others and respond to it with perfect intuition. It was as if his own journey through suffering had given him a unique form of wisdom, one that spoke directly to wounded souls, without need for words. Their visits to Captain Garner's room became a daily ritual over the next 2 weeks. Each session followed a similar pattern, brief, quiet interactions that seemed insignificant on the surface, but were slowly building something important beneath. Maria kept the conversations light and professional, focusing on Atlas's training and capabilities rather than pushing for personal revelations. Captain Garner, for his part, maintained a careful emotional distance, but his interest in Atlas was genuine. He asked detailed questions about the therapy program, evaluated Atlas's responses to commands with a handler's practiced eye, and occasionally shared technical insights from his own experience training military working dogs. "He's carrying some tension in his hindquarters when he sits," he observed during their 5th visit. "Old injury?" Maria nodded, impressed by his perception. "The vet thinks he may have been kicked or struck there repeatedly. There's scar tissue that restricts his movement sometimes, especially in cold weather." Garner's jaw tightened, the way it always did when Maria referenced Atlas's abuse. "People who hurt dogs should be shot," he said flatly. It was the kind of statement that might have alarmed Maria once, but she'd spent enough time with veterans to understand that such bluntness often masked deeper emotions. "I used to think that too," she replied honestly. "Now I just feel sorry for anyone who doesn't understand the gift of a dog's trust." On their 8th visit, they arrived to find Captain Garner's room empty. A nurse informed them that he had reluctantly agreed to a physical therapy session in the hospital's rehabilitation gym. Maria debated whether to wait or come back later, but something told her this might be an opportunity. The rehabilitation gym was a large, open space filled with various exercise equipment, parallel bars, weights, and mats. Several patients were working with therapists at different stations. Captain Garner was easy to spot. He was at the far end of the room, attempting to navigate a set of stairs with a physical therapist hovering nearby. His face was tight with pain and frustration, his movements stiff and uncoordinated. "Should we come back later?" Maria asked the head therapist, not wanting to intrude. "Actually, your timing might be perfect," the therapist replied, lowering her voice. "He's hitting a wall today, pushing too hard, getting frustrated. A distraction might help." Maria nodded and led Atlas to a spot where they were visible but not intrusive. She didn't call out to Garner, sensing that he wouldn't appreciate drawing attention to his struggles. It was Atlas who made the decision. After watching the captain for a moment, he gave a soft whine and looked up at Maria with clear intent. She recognized his request and unclipped his leash. "Go ahead," she said quietly. Atlas trotted directly to Garner, who had just sat down heavily on the bottom step, his face flushed with exertion and anger. The German Shepherd approached calmly, sat beside the captain, and leaned slightly against his leg, a grounding technique he often used with patients experiencing emotional distress. Garner looked down, momentarily startled, then reached out automatically to steady himself against Atlas's solid form. "What are you doing here?" he asked, but there was no real irritation in his voice. Atlas responded by pressing more firmly against him, his warm body offering silent support. The physical therapist, recognizing an opportunity, stepped back slightly. "Maybe take a 5-minute break, Captain, then we'll try again." Garner nodded absently, his attention focused on Atlas. As Maria approached, she noticed his breathing had slowed, matching the steady rhythm of Atlas's own breaths. "Sorry to interrupt your session," she said. "We can come back later if you prefer." "It's fine," Garner replied, surprising her. "I wasn't getting anywhere anyway." He gestured to his right leg. "Nerve damage. Doctors say it should improve with time and exercise, but it feels like I'm getting nowhere." It was the most he'd shared about his injuries since they'd met. Maria sat on the step beside him, giving him space while making it clear she was willing to listen. "Atlas had mobility issues too when I first adopted him," she offered. His back legs were so weak he could barely stand for more than a few minutes. Garner glanced at Atlas, who was now sitting perfectly straight, the picture of canine health and strength. Wouldn't know what to look at him now. It took time, Maria said, and honestly, there were days when I thought he'd never fully recover. But dogs don't think like we do. They don't get caught up in how far they have to go or how long it's taking. They just keep trying, one step at a time. Garner was silent for a long moment, absently stroking Atlas's back. Rex was like that, he finally said, his voice low. No matter how rough things got, he just kept going. Never complained, never hesitated. It was the first time he had voluntarily mentioned his fallen partner. Maria remained quiet, sensing he had more to say. He knew that last day, Garner continued, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Something was off about the whole operation. He kept alerting to areas we'd already cleared wouldn't settle. I should have listened to him. His hand stilled on Atlas's fur. If I had, maybe the others would still be alive. The raw grief in his voice was palpable. Maria chose her words carefully. Atlas sometimes has nightmares. He whimpers and his legs move like he's running. I always wondered if he was reliving whatever happened to him during those missing years. Garner nodded, understanding immediately. Probably is. Dogs remember everything. That's what I thought too. But then I noticed something. When he wakes up, he doesn't carry it with him. He doesn't spend the day looking back at whatever chased him in his dreams. Maria paused. Sometimes I think that's the most valuable thing they teach us. How to be present, even after suffering. Garner didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted slightly. After a moment, he gripped the handrail and pulled himself back to his feet. Atlas stood with him, maintaining that slight physical contact. I should finish this, Garner said, nodding toward the steps. We'll get out of your way, Maria began, but he shook his head. No, stay. It wasn't quite a request, but it wasn't an order either. He helps. For the next 20 minutes, Garner worked through his physical therapy exercises with Atlas remaining close by. The dog seemed to intuitively understand when to offer physical support and when to step back, his presence providing both practical assistance and silent encouragement. By the end of the session, Garner had progressed further than in any previous therapy appointment. The physical therapist was visibly impressed, making notes on her clipboard with raised eyebrows. That's enough for today, she finally said. You've made excellent progress, Captain. Garner was sweating and clearly in pain, but there was also a hint of satisfaction in his expression. As they walked slowly back toward his room, Garner using a cane, Atlas staying close to his right side, he glanced down at the German Shepherd. He's got good instincts, he said to Maria. Knows when to push and when to back off. He does, Maria agreed. Better than most people, honestly. When they reached his room, Garner hesitated at the door. I've been thinking about what you said, about him helping other veterans. He stopped, seemingly struggling with what to say next. Maybe you could show me some of what you do, the therapy techniques. Maria felt a surge of hope but kept her expression neutral. We could do that. Atlas would enjoy working with someone who really understands his background. Tomorrow then, Garner said with a decisive nod. And bring the training manual if there is one. I want to understand the whole process. After they left, Dr. Patel caught up with them in the hallway, her face alight with barely contained excitement. The physical therapist just called me, she said. She said it was the most engaged she's seen him since he arrived, and he actually requested to continue daily PT sessions, which he's been refusing for weeks. Maria smiled, reaching down to ruffle Atlas's ears. Don't thank me. Atlas is the miracle worker here. Dr. Patel shook her head. It's both of you. Your approach, not pushing, just being present and allowing him to come to his own conclusions. That's exactly what he needed. She looked at Atlas with newfound respect. Though I have to admit, his timing is impeccable. It's almost as if he can read minds. Not minds, Maria corrected gently. Hearts. He reads hearts. As if to confirm her words, Atlas looked up at her with those wise amber eyes that seemed to hold all the understanding in the world. Over the next 3 weeks, Captain Garner's room transformed into an unlikely training center. The hospital bed was pushed against the wall to create space, and training manuals, clickers, and specially designed therapeutic tools were neatly arranged on a small table. Garner approached Atlas's therapy techniques with the same methodical precision he had likely applied to military operations, studying, practicing, and refining each element until he understood it completely. Maria found herself more a facilitator than an instructor, as Garner's natural instincts with dogs often led him to anticipate what she was about to explain. His military background gave him an edge in understanding the foundations of Atlas's training, though the therapeutic applications were new territory. The difference, she explained one afternoon as they practiced deep pressure techniques, is that in military work, the dog serves the mission. In therapy work, the dog serves the person's emotional needs. Garner nodded, his hands positioned correctly on Atlas's sides. Different objective, same discipline, he observed. Either way, the dog needs to understand exactly what's expected. His progress was remarkable, not just in mastering the therapy techniques, but in his overall demeanor. The perpetual tension in his shoulders had eased somewhat. He was sleeping better, according to the night nurses, and participating more actively in all his treatment programs. He'd even agreed to join a support group for combat veterans, though he rarely spoke during sessions. Dr. Patel was delighted with the changes, but careful not to make too much of them. Recovery isn't linear, she reminded Maria after a particularly good day. There will still be setbacks. But this is a breakthrough we couldn't have achieved with traditional methods alone. The breakthrough came with challenges, however. Other patients and their families began to notice Garner's special arrangement with Atlas and Maria. Questions arose about favoritism and resource allocation. Why did one patient get daily sessions with the therapy dog when others had to wait weeks for an appointment? The issue came to a head during a staff meeting where Maria was asked to defend the unusual arrangement. "We understand the therapeutic value," said the hospital administrator, a well-meaning but budget-conscious woman named Diane. "But we need to be equitable in how we distribute resources. Other veterans are asking why Captain Garner gets special treatment." Maria had anticipated this concern and came prepared. "What we're doing with Captain Garner isn't just treatment," she explained. "It's also training. He's learning to work with Atlas as a handler, not just as a patient." "A handler?" Diane looked confused. "I don't understand." "Captain Garner was a military dog handler before his injury," Maria continued. "He has extensive experience training and working with service dogs. What we're doing is helping him adapt those skills to therapy work." Dr. Patel, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting he could become part of the therapy program himself, as a handler?" Maria nodded. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. With proper certification, Captain Garner could work with other veterans. His military background gives him an immediate connection that civilian therapists like me can't offer." The room fell silent as everyone considered this unexpected proposal. Finally, Diane spoke. "But he's still a patient himself. His recovery has to be the priority." "Working with Atlas is his recovery," Maria said firmly. "I've seen it every day. The more he focuses on helping Atlas help others, the more engaged he becomes with his own healing process. There is precedent for this kind of peer-to-peer therapy," Dr. Patel added. and the research shows it can be highly effective, especially in military populations where shared experience creates immediate trust. After further discussion, a compromise was reached. Captain Garner would be allowed to continue his daily sessions with Atlas and Maria, but with a new focus, preparing him to potentially join the therapy team as a handler trainee after his discharge from the hospital. The arrangement would be re-evaluated in 1 month, with input from Garner's entire medical team. Maria left the meeting feeling victorious but also nervous. She hadn't actually discussed this plan with Garner yet. It had been forming in her mind over the past weeks as she watched his natural talent with Atlas emerge, but she wasn't sure how he would react to the suggestion. That afternoon, she arrived at his room to find him sitting in a chair by the window, looking more rested than she had yet seen him. Atlas immediately went to greet him, receiving an ear scratch in return. "You're late," Garner observed, though there was no accusation in his tone. "Staff meeting run long?" Maria set down her bag and took a breath. "Actually, yes. We were discussing you." Garner's expression shuddered slightly. "What about me?" "About our arrangement. Some people have questioned why you get daily sessions with Atlas when other patients have to wait weeks." A flash of anger crossed his face. "So they're cutting us off?" "No," Maria said quickly. "Just the opposite, actually. We've been approved to continue, but with a slightly different focus." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I suggested that we're not just doing therapy. We're also training you as a potential handler." Garner went very still. "A handler," he repeated, his voice neutral. "For the therapy program," Maria clarified. "Working with veterans like we do now, it was just an idea, a way to justify the time we're spending, but—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Garner turned to look out the window, his expression unreadable. Atlas, sensing the shift in mood, moved closer to him, resting his head on Garner's knee. The captain's hand automatically dropped to stroke the dog's fur. "You don't have to decide anything now," Maria added hastily. "It's just a possibility, something to consider for after your discharge." "When I came back," Garner said quietly, still looking out the window, "I had no idea what I was going to do. The military was my life. My team was my family. Rex was—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Without them, I couldn't see a future that made any sense." Maria remained silent, recognizing the importance of what he was sharing. "The first few weeks here, I was just going through the motions, doing the minimum to get the doctors off my back." He looked down at Atlas. "Then this guy showed up, a military dog who lost everything and still found a way to keep serving." His voice roughened slightly. "Made me feel like a coward." "You're not a coward," Maria said firmly. "You're someone who experienced profound loss and trauma, just like Atlas did." Garner finally looked at her. "How did you know?" "That he could help other veterans, I mean, after what he'd been through." Maria considered the question. "I didn't at first. I just knew he needed a purpose. All I did was give him the opportunity to find it." She smiled slightly. The rest was all him. Garner nodded slowly, his hand still moving rhythmically over Atlas's coat. "Working with other vets," he said thoughtfully, "teaching them what he's taught me." "If you're interested," Maria said, careful not to push. "The program would need to certify you, of course. There's training involved." "More training," Garner said with the ghost of a smile. "That I can handle." For the remainder of their session, they didn't discuss the proposal further, focusing instead on a new calming technique for anxiety attacks. But Maria could sense that something had shifted in Garner's demeanor, a new purposefulness in his movements, a clearer focus in his eyes. As she was packing up to leave, he spoke again. "My wife is coming tomorrow. She's been visiting on weekends, but I asked her to come midweek this time. He paused. I'd like her to meet you. And Atlas. Maria understood the significance of the request. In all their sessions, Garner had rarely mentioned his wife, though Maria knew from Dr. Patel that she visited regularly and had been a strong advocate for his treatment. We'd be honored, she replied simply. The next day, Maria and Atlas arrived to find Garner's room door open and the sound of quiet conversation coming from within. A woman's voice, warm and melodious, was describing something about their home garden. As they approached, Maria could see Captain Garner seated in his usual chair, more relaxed than she had ever seen him, with a petite woman perched on the arm, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She was lovely in an understated way, chestnut hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup highlighting her clear blue eyes, and a smile that conveyed both strength and gentleness. She looked up as they entered, her gaze immediately going to Atlas. "Oh," she breathed, her eyes widening. "He's beautiful." Atlas, always sensitive to new people, approached her with his characteristic calm dignity. He stopped a respectful distance away, waiting to be invited closer. "Lisa, this is Maria Anderson and Atlas," Garner said, and Maria noted the subtle pride in his voice. "They're the ones I've been telling you about." Lisa stood and extended her hand to Maria. "Thank you," she said with simple sincerity. "I've seen more change in Robert in these last few weeks than in all the months since he came home." "Atlas deserves the credit," Maria replied, shaking her hand. "He has a gift for connecting with people who understand what he's been through." Lisa knelt down to Atlas's level, asking permission with her eyes. When Atlas moved forward, she gently stroked his head. "Robert says you were a military dog too," she said softly. "That you lost your partner and found a new purpose." Atlas responded by leaning slightly into her touch, his amber eyes warm and accepting. "He's been teaching me to work with other vets," Garner explained, and Maria noted he was already adopting the terminology she had used. Using the bond between dogs and handlers as a form of therapy. Lisa looked up at her husband, hope and surprise mingling in her expression. "Teaching you? As in, something you might continue after discharge?" Garner nodded, meeting her gaze steadily. "If they'll have me, and if you're okay with it." "Okay with it?" Lisa's voice caught slightly. "Rob, it's the first thing you've shown interest in since..." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. As Maria watched the couple share a moment of quiet understanding, with Atlas a calm presence beside them, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was why Atlas had been saved from that highway, not just to heal himself or to help anonymous others, but to create these specific connections, these bridges between loss and renewal. The desperate German shepherd who had once begged for help was now helping others find their way back from their own desperate places. And in doing so, he was building something beautiful, a community of healing that extended far beyond what Maria could have imagined when she first looked into those soulful amber eyes. The day of Captain Garner's discharge from the hospital arrived with a crisp December chill in the air. Maria and Atlas waited in the lobby while the final paperwork was processed, both sensing the significance of the moment. For nearly 3 months, they had visited Garner almost daily, watching his transformation from a withdrawn, angry patient to a man with renewed purpose. Today marked not just his medical release, but the beginning of his official training as a therapy dog handler. "Nervous?" Maria asked when he finally appeared, walking with only a slight limp, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Lisa was beside him, her face glowing with barely contained joy. "About getting out of here?" "Not at all," Garner replied with the hint of a smile that had become more frequent lately. "About everything else." He glanced down at Atlas, who had moved to greet him with a gentle nudge against his hand. Let's just say I'm glad I have a good teacher. The transition plan they had developed with Dr. Patel was straightforward but cautious. Garner would begin as an observer during Maria's regular therapy sessions, gradually taking on more responsibility as he completed the formal certification process. They would meet 3 days a week at the hospital and the veterans' residential facility, with additional training sessions at the center where Maria and Atlas had originally been certified. Remember, Dr. Patel had emphasized during their final consultation, "This is part of your therapy too, Captain. If at any point it becomes overwhelming, we adjust. Your recovery remains the priority." Garner had nodded with appropriate seriousness, but Maria had caught the look in his eyes, the same determined focus she'd seen in so many veterans who'd found a mission that mattered to them. She knew he would push himself hard, perhaps too hard, and made a mental note to watch for signs of strain. That first week established their new rhythm. Garner proved to be a keen observer, missing nothing about how Atlas interacted with different patients and how Maria facilitated those connections. He took meticulous notes, asked insightful questions during their debriefing sessions, and began developing his own ideas about potential applications for the therapy techniques. Atlas responds differently to physical versus psychological trauma, he noted after their third session. With amputees or visibly injured vets, he's more physically engaged, leaning against them, offering himself for support. But with PTSD patients, he maintains a slight distance unless invited closer, and he's more focused on eye contact. Maria was impressed by his perception. "I never explicitly taught him that. He seems to intuitively understand what each person needs." "It's threat assessment," Garner explained. "Military dogs are trained to constantly evaluate situations for danger. Atlas is using that same skill set, but instead of looking for external threats, he's identifying emotional vulnerabilities and responding accordingly." By the end of the second week, Garner was taking a more active role, guiding Atlas through basic interactions while Maria observed. His natural command presence inspired confidence in the veterans they worked with, many of whom responded positively to his direct, no-nonsense approach. "You don't baby them," commented one older veteran after a particularly successful session. "Most civilians treat us like we're made of glass." "Because I know you're not," Garner had replied simply. Yet Maria also noticed how he softened around certain patients. The young Marine with severe burns who reminded him of a teammate he'd lost. The elderly Vietnam veteran whose hands shook uncontrollably when he spoke about his experiences. In those moments, Garner revealed a gentleness that few might have suspected from his military bearing. Atlas, for his part, seemed to thrive with the addition of a second handler. He worked seamlessly with both of them, sometimes appearing to intentionally bridge the space between Maria and Garner when a situation required their combined approaches. "He's the translator," Lisa observed one evening when Maria had joined them for dinner at their home. "When Rob gets too military and you get too therapeutic, Atlas finds the middle ground." It was an astute observation, and one that made them all laugh in recognition of its truth. The dinner itself was a milestone, the first social invitation Maria had received from the Garners, marking a shift from professional colleagues to something approaching friendship. Their home was a modest but comfortable ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood. The interior reflected Lisa's warm personality, with comfortable furniture, family photographs, and subtle touches of color throughout. What struck Maria most, however, was the evidence of Atlas's influence. A dog bed in the corner of the living room, toys neatly arranged in a basket, even a framed photograph of the German Shepherd alongside the family pictures. "He's here so often he needed his own space," Lisa explained, following Maria's gaze to the dog bed. "Though I think Rob is secretly hoping he'll stay overnight sometime." Garner, returning from the kitchen with drinks, didn't deny it. "He centers the house," he said simply. "Makes it feel right." As winter deepened, their program began attracting attention beyond the VA hospital. A local news station ran a feature on the unusual partnership, the former military dog and the injured Special Forces captain, both finding healing through helping others. The story went viral, leading to inquiries from other VA facilities and veterans organizations across the country. "We need to be careful," Maria cautioned during a strategy meeting with David, who had remained a mentor and advocate for their work. "Growing too quickly could compromise the quality of what we're doing." "Agreed," David said, "but we also can't ignore the demand. There are veterans waiting months for therapy services that could help them now." The solution emerged from an unexpected source. One snowy January afternoon, as they were leaving the VA hospital after a long day of sessions, they encountered a young woman waiting beside Maria's car. She was bundled against the cold, her face partially obscured by a thick scarf. But something about her posture caught Maria's attention even before she spoke. "Ms. Anderson, Captain Garner, I'm sorry to ambush you like this, but I've been trying to reach you through official channels without success." Atlas, normally friendly with strangers, positioned himself slightly in front of Maria and Garner, not aggressive but clearly on alert. "Who are you?" Garner asked, his voice taking on the edge of command that emerged whenever he sensed potential threat. The woman unwound her scarf, revealing a face that couldn't have been more than 25 years old, with serious eyes that held a depth of experience beyond her years. "Lieutenant Diane Rodriguez, U.S. Army," she replied, automatically straightening her posture at Garner's tone. "Former handler with the 510th Military Working Dog Detachment." Garner's stance relaxed slightly at the identification. "Former? Medical discharge, 8 months ago," she answered matter-of-factly. "My partner Kira stepped on an IED. She didn't make it. I did, mostly." She gestured to her left leg, and Maria realized there was something slightly off about her gait. A prosthetic, likely. "I'm sorry about Kira," Garner said, genuine empathy in his voice. "Why were you looking for us?" "Because of this." Rodriguez pulled out her phone and showed them the news story about their program. "When I saw what you were doing, handlers working with other veterans, it was like someone turned a light on. Since my discharge, I've been..." She hesitated. "Lost. Nothing felt right. But this makes sense to me." Maria and Garner exchanged glances. Atlas, having completed his assessment of the newcomer, had moved closer to Rodriguez, his curiosity evident. "Are you proposing to join our program?" Maria asked. Rodriguez nodded firmly. "I have extensive training experience. Before Kira, I worked with the breeding program at Lackland, helped train puppies for deployment. I know dogs, and I know what it's like to lose your partner and your purpose in one day." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes told a different story. Atlas made the decision for them. He approached Rodriguez and sat directly in front of her, looking up with an expression Maria had come to recognize, the one that said he had found someone who needed him. Rodriguez knelt despite her prosthetic, her movements fluid from practice, and met Atlas's gaze. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly. "You've been through it too, haven't you?" Later that evening, as they discussed the unexpected encounter over coffee at Maria's house, Garner was thoughtful. "She's exactly what we've been looking for," he said. "Someone with the right background, the right motivation. And her own healing to do," Maria added. "Just like you, just like Atlas. Just like all of us," Garner acknowledged. "Maybe that's the key. Not just dogs helping people or people helping dogs, but wounded healers working together." As if confirming his words, Atlas, who had been dozing by the fireplace, lifted his head and looked at them with those wise amber eyes that seemed to hold all the answers they were seeking. "I think we just found our way forward," Maria said softly. "Not expansion for the sake of growth, but connection for the sake of healing. The program that had begun with one desperate German shepherd was becoming something none of them could have imagined. A community of broken healers finding wholeness through helping others. And Atlas, once abandoned and abused, now stood at the center of it all, a living testament to the resilience of the spirit and the transformative power of compassion. Spring arrived with a burst of new beginnings. The program that had started with Atlas and Maria, then grown to include Captain Garner, now welcomed Lieutenant Rodriguez as its newest member. With her addition, they were able to expand their services to include specialized sessions for female veterans, an underserved population with unique challenges. Many women veterans struggle with feeling invisible, Rodriguez explained during a team meeting. Their service is often minimized or overlooked entirely, and those who experience military sexual trauma face additional layers of trust issues. Atlas had formed an immediate bond with Rodriguez, somehow sensing her deep understanding of the handler-dog relationship. She, in turn, approached him with a blend of professional respect and genuine affection that complemented both Maria's nurturing style and Garner's disciplined approach. Their team dynamics evolved naturally, each member bringing different strengths. Maria remained the program director and primary liaison with medical staff, while Garner excelled at connecting with combat veterans, particularly those with severe PTSD. Rodriguez developed protocols specifically for amputees, drawing from her own experience with prosthetics, and established a women's support group that met weekly. Atlas moved fluidly between all three handlers, his adaptability a constant source of amazement. He seemed to intuitively understand which approach each patient needed, Maria's gentle encouragement, Garner's straightforward camaraderie, or Rodriguez's quiet empathy. "He's not just a therapy dog anymore," David observed during one of his periodic visits to evaluate their progress. "He's become a master instructor, training all of you even as you think you're training him." By April, their waiting list had grown so long that David proposed a solution they hadn't previously considered, expanding beyond Atlas to include other suitable dogs in the program. "We've been focusing on the handlers," he explained, "but we also need to think about scaling the canine side of the equation. Atlas can't be everywhere at once, and his energy has limits." The suggestion led to animated discussion. Maria worried about diluting the special quality that Atlas brought to their work, while Garner was concerned about maintaining consistent standards with multiple dogs. Rodriguez, however, saw immediate potential. "There are retired military dogs in need of homes," she pointed out. "Dogs with training and experience who might thrive in this kind of work just like Atlas did." The idea took root, and within weeks, they had established contact with several military dog retirement programs. The criteria they developed were specific: dogs with the right temperament for therapy work, preferably with some connection to veterans or military service, and without aggressive tendencies that might be triggered in therapeutic settings. Their first candidate arrived in early May, a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois named Echo, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before a minor hip injury led to her early retirement. Her former handler had been unable to adopt her due to family circumstances, leaving Echo in transition at a military kennel facility. When the transport van arrived at the training center, everyone gathered to meet her. Atlas, who had been calmly observing from his place near Maria, showed immediate interest as Echo emerged from her crate, alert, cautious, but not fearful. "Let's give them space for a proper introduction," Rodriguez suggested, her handler experience evident. "First impressions matter for working dogs." They moved to the fenced training yard where Echo was allowed off-leash within the secure perimeter. Atlas followed, maintaining a respectful distance until Maria gave him permission to approach. What followed was a masterclass in canine communication, circling, subtle shifts in posture, ear positions, and eventually a mutual decision to accept each other's presence. She's assessing him and he's showing her he's not a threat, Garner observed quietly. Military dogs are taught to be suspicious first, friendly second. Echo gradually relaxed as Atlas demonstrated his calm confidence. By the end of the hour, they were sharing the same water bowl and investigating the yard's perimeter as a coordinated team. "I think we just got approved," Maria said with a smile. Echo's integration into the program proceeded with remarkable smoothness. She responded well to their training protocols and showed a particular aptitude for work with veterans suffering from hypervigilance, perhaps because her own military training had emphasized constant environmental awareness. With 2 dogs in rotation, they were able to significantly expand their caseload. Atlas continued to work primarily with the most challenging patients, while Echo excelled with veterans in the later stages of recovery. The dogs developed complementary roles, and the handlers adjusted their approaches accordingly. By midsummer, their program had gained national recognition. A major veterans magazine featured them in a cover story, highlighting the unique combination of canine therapy and peer support from handlers with military experience. The publicity brought both opportunities and challenges. "We're getting calls from VA hospitals across the country," Maria reported during a team meeting in July. "They want to replicate what we're doing. And we've had 4 more handlers apply to join the program," Rodriguez added. "All former military, all with dog handling experience. Plus 3 potential therapy dogs," Garner noted. 2 retired military and 1 from a police K9 unit. The growth was exciting but also concerning. Their success was built on the special chemistry between Atlas, the handlers, and the veterans they served. Could that be maintained as they expanded? Would the personal touch that made their approach so effective be lost in a larger operation? "We need to consider what Atlas would want," Maria said quietly, glancing at the German shepherd who lay in his usual spot near the window, watching them with those wise amber eyes. The statement might have seemed odd to outsiders, but her teammates understood perfectly. Atlas had become more than a therapy dog or even a beloved pet. He was the heart of their mission, the catalyst who had brought them together and whose journey from desperation to healing inspired everything they did. "He'd want us to help as many veterans as possible," Rodriguez said with certainty. "But not at the cost of quality," Garner added. "He wouldn't want us to lose what makes this special." The solution emerged gradually over the next few weeks, a training academy model where their core team would focus on developing new handler dog teams who would then return to their home facilities to implement the program locally. It would allow them to expand their impact while maintaining the integrity of their approach. Atlas played a central role in this new direction, helping to evaluate both potential therapy dogs and handler candidates. His ability to assess compatibility between humans and canines proved uncannily accurate. Teams he responded positively to inevitably succeeded in the program, while those he showed hesitation about typically encountered challenges. "He sees something we don't," Garner remarked after Atlas had shown clear preference for one handler candidate over another, despite both having similar qualifications on paper. "It's like he can sense their motivation, whether they're here for the right reasons." The first official training cohort began in September. 3 handler dog teams selected from dozens of applicants. The 6-week intensive program covered everything from basic therapy techniques to specialized interventions for different types of trauma. Atlas and Echo served as demonstration dogs, showing the newcomers what was possible when the bond between handler and dog was fully developed. During this period, Maria noticed subtle changes in Atlas. Though still energetic and fully engaged in his work, he seemed more deliberate in his movements, more measured in how he expended his energy. At nearly 4 years old, he was entering his prime as a therapy dog, but the physical demands of the work were substantial. "He's pacing himself," Dr. Miller observed during Atlas's regular checkup. "It's actually quite remarkable. Most dogs work at full intensity until they're completely exhausted, but he's learned to conserve his strength for when it's most needed. This observation led to an important addition to their training curriculum, teaching handlers to recognize signs of fatigue in their therapy dogs and how to balance the animal's well-being with the needs of the patients they served. "The dogs give everything they have," Maria explained to the trainees. "It's our responsibility to make sure they don't give too much." As fall painted the landscape in vibrant hues, they celebrated a milestone, the graduation of their first training cohort. The ceremony was small but meaningful, held in the same training yard where Atlas had first met Echo months earlier. Each handler dog team demonstrated their skills before receiving their certification, with Atlas watching attentively from his place beside Maria. The most moving moment came when a veteran named Michael, who had been one of Atlas's first patients and was now recovered enough to volunteer with the program, presented each team with their official therapy vests. "What these dogs and their handlers do isn't just therapy," he told the assembled group, his voice steady despite his ongoing struggle with PTSD. "It's a lifeline. A year ago, I couldn't leave my house. I couldn't hold a conversation. I couldn't imagine a future worth living for." He paused, looking down at Atlas, who had moved to stand supportively at his side. "This dog didn't just help me feel better. He helped me find myself again when I thought that person was gone forever." As the newly certified teams prepared to return to their home facilities across the country, Maria realized they had created something powerful and enduring. From one desperate German shepherd begging for help on a rainy morning had grown a network of healing that would touch thousands of lives. That evening, as Atlas dozed contentedly after the long day, Maria sat beside him on the floor of her living room, gently stroking his coat. "You did this," she whispered. "All of it started with you." Atlas opened one eye and thumped his tail once against the carpet, as if to say he knew exactly what he had accomplished, and that his work was far from finished. 2 years to the day after Atlas was found on that rainy highway, Maria stood at the podium of a conference center, looking out at an audience of hundreds. Veterans, handlers, medical professionals, and therapy dogs filled the room, all gathered for the first national conference on canine-assisted therapy for military trauma. At her feet, Atlas lay in a perfect downstay, his amber eyes surveying the crowd with dignified attention. "When I first met Atlas," Maria began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "he was at his lowest point, abandoned, abused, and desperately seeking help. Today, he sits before you as the founder of a movement that has changed hundreds of lives." She paused, looking down at the German shepherd with undisguised pride. "His journey reminds us that our deepest wounds can become our greatest gifts if we're brave enough to transform our pain into purpose." The conference represented the culmination of everything they had built over the past 2 years. Their training academy had certified 27 handler dog teams now working in VA facilities across the country. Their therapeutic protocols had been formally recognized by the Department of Veterans Affairs as an evidence-based intervention for combat trauma. Research studies were documenting the effectiveness of their approach, with preliminary results showing significant improvements in PTSD symptoms, decreased medication dependence, and higher treatment retention rates among veterans who participated in the program. From the front row, Captain Garner, now Program Director of Handler Training, gave her an encouraging nod. Beside him sat Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had recently been promoted to Canine Evaluation Specialist after demonstrating an exceptional talent for matching dogs with the right handlers and therapeutic environments. Echo lay at her feet, now a senior therapy dog herself and a key training assistant for new canine recruits. As Maria concluded her opening remarks and introduced the first panel of speakers, she reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as a simple desire to help one traumatized dog had evolved into a nationally recognized program that was changing the landscape of veteran care. Atlas, once a desperate soul in need of saving, had become a healer and teacher whose influence extended far beyond anyone's expectations. The conference schedule was packed with workshops, demonstrations, and panel discussions. Teams from across the country shared their experiences implementing the program in different settings, from large VA hospitals to small rural outreach centers. Research scientists presented data on the physiological and psychological mechanisms behind the therapy's effectiveness. Veterans gave powerful testimonials about their journeys from isolation and despair to reconnection and hope. During a mid-morning break, Maria found herself surrounded by people eager to meet Atlas and learn more about the program's origins. Among them was a distinguished-looking older gentleman who waited patiently until the crowd thinned before approaching. Ms. Anderson, Dr. James Winters, Department of Defense. He offered his hand. "I've been following your work with great interest." Maria shook his hand, curious. "Thank you, Dr. Winters. Are you involved in veteran care?" In a manner of speaking. He knelt slowly to greet Atlas, who assessed him with careful attention before allowing a brief pat. "I oversee the military working dog program at the Pentagon. Your success has caught our attention, particularly your work with retired and traumatized service dogs." Atlas maintained his perfect position at Maria's side, but she could sense his heightened alertness. Even after years of recovery and successful therapy work, he still showed subtle signs of his military past in the presence of certain authority figures. "We're exploring new protocols for dogs transitioning out of service," Dr. Winters continued. "Too many of them struggle with the adjustment to civilian life, much like their human counterparts. Your model suggests a better way forward." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement calling attendees back to the main hall, but Dr. Winters left his card with a request to continue the discussion later. As Maria watched him walk away, she felt a surge of emotion. The program had begun with the simple goal of helping traumatized veterans through canine connection. Now it was circling back to potentially transform the lives of the military dogs themselves. The afternoon sessions focused on specialized applications of the therapy, working with female veterans, addressing military sexual trauma, supporting family members of affected veterans, and adapting techniques for veterans with physical disabilities. Atlas participated in several demonstrations, showing the advanced techniques he had perfected over years of service. Though he now worked fewer hours than in the early days, his impact remained profound. "He knows exactly when to step in and when to step back," observed a therapist from Minneapolis after watching Atlas calm a veteran experiencing a flashback during a demonstration. "It's like he can read the emotional temperature of a room and adjust accordingly." "That's his superpower," Maria agreed, "and he's teaching it to the other dogs in the program." The day concluded with a recognition ceremony honoring the pioneers of their work. Maria, Garner, and Rodriguez received awards for program development, but the loudest applause came when Atlas was presented with a special commendation. The citation, read by a high-ranking VA official, acknowledged extraordinary service in healing the invisible wounds of war and exceptional contribution to the field of trauma recovery. As Atlas accepted his commendation, a specially designed medallion attached to his therapy vest, along with a very large biscuit, Maria found herself thinking about that rainy day at the shelter, how close they had come to missing this journey entirely. If the highway patrol officer had driven past without stopping, if the shelter had been too full to take another case, if she hadn't volunteered that particular day, the sequence of seemingly random events that had brought them to this moment now appeared as necessary steps in a greater purpose. Later that evening, after the official events had concluded, the core team gathered in Maria's hotel room for a quiet celebration. They ordered room service, reminisced about the early days, and shared their visions for the program's future. Atlas and Echo dozed contentedly nearby, occasionally perking up at the mention of their names or the rustle of food wrappers. "I've been thinking," Maria said during a lull in the conversation, "about starting a sanctuary." "What kind of sanctuary?" Rodriguez asked, reaching down to stroke Echo's ears. "For dogs like Atlas, military and police dogs who've experienced trauma or abuse, a place where they could recover and, if appropriate, train for therapy work." Garner nodded thoughtfully. "The need is definitely there. We get inquiries every month about traumatized service dogs, more than we can currently handle." "It would bring everything full circle," Rodriguez agreed, "using what we've learned from Atlas to help other dogs like him." "We could call it Atlas's Haven," Maria suggested, glancing at the German shepherd who had lifted his head at the sound of his name. "A place of healing and new beginnings." The idea took hold immediately, energy filling the room as they began to sketch possibilities. A rural property with space for rehabilitation, training facilities, housing for dogs in transition, perhaps even a residential program for veterans interested in becoming handlers. As the planning continued, Maria slipped away from the group for a moment and sat beside Atlas, who shifted to rest his head in her lap in a gesture of affection he reserved for their quiet moments together. "What do you think, buddy?" she whispered. "Ready for a new adventure?" Atlas looked up at her with those wise amber eyes that had seen so much: the darkness of abuse, the uncertainty of abandonment, the joy of connection, and the purpose of service. In them, Maria saw not just acceptance of the new path forward, but a profound understanding of the journey that had brought them here. 5 years ago, a desperate German shepherd had sat by a highway in the rain, watching cars pass by, somehow knowing that his salvation depended on making a connection. Today, that same dog had become the centerpiece of a healing movement, his story inspiring humans and canines alike to find purpose through their pain. As the night deepened and plans for Atlas's Haven took shape around them, Maria realized that his journey had never really been about being saved. It had been about becoming a savior, not just for her or for the veterans whose lives he'd touched, but for all those who would follow the trail he had blazed from desperation to dignity, from brokenness to belonging. Outside the hotel window, rain began to fall gently on the city streets, not the desperate pounding rain of that first day, but a soft, nurturing shower that promised growth and renewal. Atlas listened to it for a moment, then settled more deeply against Maria with a contented sigh that seemed to say, "This is exactly where we're meant to be." The circle was complete, but the story was far from over. It would continue in the lives of every dog who found refuge at Atlas's Haven, every veteran who discovered hope through the program, every handler who learned to translate between human and canine hearts. And at the center of it all would remain the spirit of one remarkable German shepherd who had transformed the darkest chapter of his life into a light that would guide others home.